Hi, welcome. I'm Kate Mackay, Associate Film Curator here at the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive online. And I'm delighted to welcome you to BAMPFA's Watch from Home live stream conversation and Q&A for Ramona Diaz's chilling and all too timely documentary, 1,000 Cuts. This film is an exceptional portrait of Maria Ressa, the embattled journalist of the Filipino online news source, Rappler. And it's a cautionary tale about the fragility of democracy when press freedom is threatened. Thank you very much to Professor Andrés Cediel for joining us to speak with Ramona Diaz today. And a big thank you to everyone who's tuning in. We really miss seeing you in our Barbara Osher Theater, but we're very happy that you have found us here. And I'll give a quick introduction to our guests today. Andrés Cediel is a documentary filmmaker and professor of visual journalism here at the UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism. He produced Rape in the Fields and was a writer and producer of Rape on the Night Shift, which combined to win a DuPont Columbia Journalism Award and the RFK Grand Prize for Journalism, and were nominated for 4 Emmy Awards. He was writer and producer of Trafficked in America and co-produced The Judge and the General, a DuPont Columbia Journalism winner, an Emmy Award nominated film that chronicled human rights cases against the former Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet. Ramona S. Diaz's award-winning films include IMELDA from 2004, The Learning from 2011, Don't Stop Believin', Everyman's Journey from 2012, and Motherland from 2017. Motherland won a special jury award at the Sundance Film Festival and premiered at the Berlin International Film Festival, and was also nominated for an Independent Spirit Award and a Peabody Award. Diaz was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship in 2016 and is a current recipient of a United States Artists Fellowship. The format today will be a conversation of about 30 to 35 minutes, and then we'll open it up we'll have time for questions from the audience. So you can enter your questions in the chat feed on YouTube at any time. And then we'll take a look at them when we get to the question portion of the evening. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Andrés and Ramona. Thanks very much for being here.
Thank you so much, Kate. Thanks for everybody here at BAMPFA for making this happen. And thank you, Ramona, for being here.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. The film is incredible and incredibly timely, as Kate was saying. And I want to get into all the filmmaking that went into this, all the techniques, all the things that were done. It was really riveting to watch the whole thing. And I also want to talk about the broader issues of journalism and press freedom and disinformation, all these things that are happening in the Philippines that are happening right now in this country too. But first, I wanted to start with the story of Maria Ressa, who's clearly the protagonist in this piece. She jumps off the screen. She's a larger-than-life character, and seems like an obvious person to have made a film about in retrospect. But how was it that you came to know her and decided that you were going to make a film about her in this time?
Hi, Andres. In the beginning, it wasn't really about Maria Ressa. When President Duterte became president in 2016, I was actually finishing my previous film, Motherland. But immediately after he became president, the drug war started. And he campaigned on the drug war. So it's not a surprise, but I think it was just a shock at the number of bodies immediately on the ground. And I started seeing all the pictures that were coming out of the Philippines, and they were horrific. It was something I couldn't, avert my gaze. So I said, and I'm Filipino American. I was born and raised in the Philippines. I grew up under martial law, and the 1986 People Power Revolution happened, where the Marcoses were ousted, and it took a whole generation to build institutions, democratic institutions. And I felt like, what is happening? What is going on? So I went back in late 2017, thinking I was going to make a film about the drug war or something connected to the drug war. I wasn't sure, But when I got there, I realized a lot of people already had that idea of making a film about the drug war because it's a good story. So I looked around. I knew I wanted to make a film about that time. I mean, the Philippines under Duterte. And then there was Maria Ressa and Rappler. Rappler is her on-site magazine that she founded, newspaper, news site that's purely online. And they were the ones who were really calling out the impunity of the drug war, the numbers. They were questioning the numbers because the government numbers put it at like 4,000, which is still horrific, right? But the human rights organizations were saying it's more like 27,000. So there was a discrepancy. They were calling that out. But more than that, I think Maria was also connecting the drug war to disinformation, to impunity, disinformation, fake news, and trolls and bots. I mean, she was talking about algorithms and Facebook and the erosion and how that's connected to the erosion of democracy back in 2016, when very few people were talking about it. I mean, she was the only one. She had written her first article then. So I thought, you know, that to me was interesting. The fact that it was more, it made it more global. I think it's very specifically a Philippine story, but because of disinformation, it makes it global because everyone seems to understand that and are victims of disinformation.
So what were some of the things that you found as you started to look into the themes that she was uncovering about disinformation and attacks on the press? I think from an American perspective, watching the piece, you know, in the very opening of the piece, Duterte is talking about fake news, and all of a sudden that's a cue. And it's like, okay, this is starting to feel like there's parallels here. What were the parallels that you found in the Philippines of what's going on in the United States right now?
So when Trump called CNN fake news, maybe a week later, Duterte called Rappler fake news. So they're playing off the same, they have the same playbook, it seems. But there are similarities, but there are also differences, I think. The weaponization of social media, definitely. Calling out the press as enemies of the people, that's similar. But I think in terms of Trump versus Duterte, Duterte has been a politician all his life. Although he likes to think of himself as an outsider, he's really not. He's an outsider in terms of the political elite in Manila, the capital. But he was a provincial mayor for a very long time. He was a son of a governor. So he knew politics. He knows politics deeply and understands it and knows how to consolidate power. And he's also Bulgarian, as you see in the film. And he has very misogynistic language. Maybe they're the same in that way, but it's more explicit when it comes to Duterte. But definitely the calling out of press as the enemy of the people, because that's what authoritarians do, right? If you want to start consolidating power, you go after the press because their job is to call out all the things you don't want to talk about, all the things that are done in the dark that you don't want to come out into the light. So I think that's very similar.
Yeah, it was quite shocking to see how, you know, whereas Trump says enemies of the people, and it feels like he's talking in abstract terms, there's a moment in your piece where Duterte is speaking directly to a young journalist face to face in a crowd and says to her, if you end up dead, it means nothing to me. It's very much a violent threat to a journalist's life to her face. I mean, it's the explicitness of it, the violence of it is truly shocking.
No, because that's his rhetoric. His rhetoric is one of violence and revenge. And I am gonna, like Patricia Evangelista said, he didn't promise people change. He did promise some kind of change, but more than that, he promised them revenge. And it's usually revenge against the oligarchy, right? They're the bad guys and journalists. They've made you suffer, and he's talking to the poor. He's talking to, because it's such a high rate of poverty in the Philippines. So he's talking to them and saying, I'm not only gonna change your life, I'm gonna revenge everyone who's done wrong to you. I'm gonna revenge them. So it's an interesting rhetoric. It's very, very violent. But that's what he likes, right? Because he does say that in order to lead, you have to instill fear fear is very key to the way he leads. And part of that is the language of violence and misogyny and brutal, just brutal language. He loves the word kill. He always talks about killing people. And that's a danger because he normalizes it, right? Mm-hmm. People want to hear it and it becomes normal now. I think that is a key danger when things don't shock you anymore. Yeah. And you can never go back from that, right? That's why you should always be shocked and call it out.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's exactly what the journalists at Rappler were doing. They were calling it out and they were challenging Duterte in this way. And then they were receiving an incredible amount of pushback, online threats, violent threats against them. And one of the things that was most inspiring and shocking to see how these journalists responded, particularly Maria Ressa, is that she then took that moment to do journalism on the threats that were being leveled against her. Can you explain a little bit about what she was doing?
So she is now the victim. She's actually become the story because she's in the crosshairs of the president. So she's a victim of trolling. She is a victim of arrests. She has 8 cases against her. She's been arrested twice, detained once, and she's been found guilty wrongly of cyber libel and sentenced to up to 6 years in prison. So she has become the story. So there's something about Maria that happens. She's a quintessential journalist because even if she's the story, she has this the capability to still be the journalist of her own story. Like I watched her many times in the courtroom, right? They're talking about her. I mean, the case is against her and they're talking about her and she's writing. She's constantly writing. So once I leaned in, I'm like, Maria, what are you writing? Like they're talking about you, right? She goes, I'm writing notes. She's taking notes like a journalist. And that's why she has the capacity to do that, to step back and still be the journalist, even if she's now become the story. And so the stories are, especially when she's trolled, as you see in the film, they're very personal attacks, very gendered and very violent attacks, rape, behead. I mean, really incredibly, I mean, anyone else would be like shocked, but she goes into that journalist mode and she takes notes and she's like gonna write an article still. It's really pretty incredible. I've never seen anyone like that.
Yeah, and she took it a step further and started doing what we would call data journalism. She started tracking who was posting these threats, who was sharing them and liking them, and then how these networks were created that just amplified these attacks and these threats and this misinformation from, I believe it was at one point, there was 26 accounts spread to millions of viewers. Can you talk a little bit about what this network was and why it's important for us here in the United States to care about the online social media habits in the Philippines?
So when she was first attacked, she was first attacked because they started questioning the numbers of the drug war. So the trolls came after them, really aided by the administration. And I think she was getting like 90 hate messages an hour. So she actually called Facebook and said, what are you going to do about this? And they said, you just have to block them and just block them from your Facebook. And she goes, I can't do that. It's 90 hate messages an hour. You can't manage that. So what she did was like you said, she started looking at the system, at the DNA. So she says, content is really a whack-a-mole game. You can't just take content out because you'll never win. But if you see the system, the DNA that allows for disinformation to spread, which is like networks of like one account can affect 3 million accounts. And once you explain that, then you really see it as, I hate to use this term, but a virus, right? It's like a disease that spreads and then you can never take it back. So even if you take down the disinformation, it's never the same because all those people affected will never be disinfected, right? They'll forever be. They'll never see that you took it down. So she thought it was content that was key, and she uses the Philippines as like a cautionary tale because the Philippines is 100% of people who are internet are on Facebook. Basically, Facebook is our internet, and that's where all the weaponization of social media really started against her, against rapper. And this is what's happening here. And she says, they tried things, the whistleblower, Chris Wiley, she actually interviews him and Chris Wiley said, they try things in the global South, like always, right? And then if it works, they port it over to the West. They try it in the West and it worked there. Disinformation is so insidious because you don't even think you're a victim of it when you are, right? You really have to be active, I think an active participant of news. You have to really be critical and not just be passively take it on.
Yeah. There's so many layers in this film because you're doing journalism about a journalist who's doing journalism about herself in the middle of this election that's happening. I wanted to start to turn the questioning towards you and the choices that you were making. You went there looking to do an observational film, but now you're in the middle of one of the biggest journalism and a very legal case in the middle of an election. At what point do you start feeling like you're in a journalist role or not?
I never saw myself in a journalist role. I think to me, there's always a distinction between the filmmaker and the journalist. And now having filmed the journalist, I see that even more so because it was very interesting to actually film Maria and her reporters. I see myself as observing behavior, right? I wait for behavior to happen, to unfold, characters to unfold. Maria, it was interesting because as a journalist, she knows what she wants, right? Quick, to the point, facts, get it out there and then wrap it up. So she'd always, when she said, when she gave us access, she'd always turn to me and say, did you get it? I'm like, get what? She goes, did you get what you wanted? I said, yes, but I won't know until I know. She goes, when will you know? I'm like, in the edit? I'm like, even more editing? She goes, what is this you're doing? So she couldn't really, I said, and then I explained it to her after. I said, what we do is we go on safari. Basically what we do. And we wait there and wait for these people to interact in their natural habitat. And then we film. Because many, many times, as an observational filmmaker, as you know, you wait around for a long time. If it's 10 hours, you wait around. But if the last 30 minutes is golden, you got it. Then you can go home. But you have to wait for the 30 minutes. And she couldn't really wrap her head around that. She goes, that's crazy. That's a crazy way to make a film. I said, yeah, it's really a crazy way to make a film. But because Maria is really interested in process and stuff, she got it immediately. And then she stopped asking me if I had it. And then she said, do you need SOTs? I'm like, SOTs? It's really funny. But it was so interesting to cover a journalist because they know story. On the other hand, they know story really well. And then they can read the story. But it's just different ways of approaching it when we're like a crazier people who stay forever.
Well, it clearly paid off because there were some incredible moments in the piece. And one of these scenes was when she was packing her suitcase and she was with her sister. And I think she had already been arrested once, maybe she had been arrested twice. And she's decided that she's going to keep doing what she's going to do, come what may. And she's very strong and she's very resolute. But her sister is scared for her, and her sister is telling her that she doesn't want her to be martyred. Can you talk a little bit about how you get a scene like this? How are you able to be in a moment where two sisters are talking about life and death issues?
Yeah, that's when hanging out pays. I'm always the first one in and the last one out the room. That happened. They were packing up. I think they were in, DC, or I think they were in Washington, DC. I forget now. And I had seen interactions between her and her sister. So if you hang out long enough, you know the vibe, right? You know the relationships with family and stuff. And we were given so much access that she allowed us to hang out with her family and her parents and stuff. So I knew where Michelle stood, and I knew Maria well enough to know that she was just gonna not even have it, right? She was not gonna have that conversation, no matter how much Michelle tried. But if you and then they were in the same room together, just the two of them, in a hotel room packing up. I mean, things happen, and then I had a feeling, okay, this is it. I've seen this conversation before, but usually it was with a room full of other people, right? At the dinner table with the rest of the family, with kids running around, and it never worked. But here they are alone, and you kind of know, because you've been around, so you've been around them a lot. And so I told Gabriel, it was only me and Gabriel, my cinematographer. So I mean, we're always, if we had a big crew, we're always small in those situations. I said, Gabriel, just keep on shooting. I think something's going to happen here. And it does, it's like, yeah, you can't plan. You can sort of plan for it if you know what's coming down the pike, but when it happens, it's like golden. You still can't quite believe that you capture such moments.
Yeah, and it was really a moment that was capturing everything as the audience that we were feeling, that we wanted to know. I wanted to ask her, "Why aren't you scared?" And one of the things that you were able to do, because as resolute and dedicated as Maria is, she's not terribly expressive with her emotions, but you were able to build out a cast of characters around her who were. Can you talk a little bit about some of the younger journalists that you profiled?
Yeah, so I profiled 3 of the young journalists at Rappler, and I think the journalists, they're all, the average age of Rappler employees of the company is, I think, 27 years old, like mid-20s. They're really young. And I think the young reporters are really, they're Maria's legacy. They're her true legacy. They're brave, and they're idealistic. They're young. Usually it's their first jobs out of college, and they're covering the president. They're covering the drug war. They're covering the police. And there's something about them that is so clear in their mission of journalism. And it's pretty incredible to see. They're inspiring. I mean, I think I was inspired by them. And they give me hope for the country. They really do, because there's nothing that, especially Pia, as you see here, Pia she was banned from covering Duterte because Duterte, she has a really interesting relationship with Duterte. So what happened was when Duterte first started running, no one really took him seriously. And it was only Rappler who covered him. And Pia was the very first one assigned to Duterte, and she had to go to Davao. So she really got to know the candidate, and they became sort of friends, right? She covered him critically, but Duterte felt that Pia was a friend. So when he became president and she still was covering him critically, he was offended, right? Because he said, "We're friends. Why are you covering me critically?" And she's like, "It's my job. That's what I do." And she was so young and then she was banned from the palace. But she still asked the hard questions, right? In that scene when, Duterte says, "What are you doing?" Questions her and starts berating her. She has the presence of mind to say, "Well, Mr. President, I think I've already answered that question. Can you answer my question now? I think I've already addressed that." Which is a presence of mind that is really wise in years. Like, it's as if she had been a journalist like for 35 years. It was this calm. And so with Patricia. But Patricia's interesting because she covers the drug war. And in the film, she talks about her role as a journalist and should she record? Should she help? I mean, it was her first time out there. And I love how she processes out loud the role of a journalist. What is it? Is it to help? Is it to continue filming? So she continues filming. That was pretty incredible. And she's been covering the drug war since 2016. And it's a war. I mean, there are dead bodies on the streets. I think there's a very big difference. I think in this country, when you think of the drug war, obviously the opioid crisis or Just Say No, right? It's like this program, but there it's a war because there are dead bodies on the streets and you have to cover them. And sometimes in the beginning, especially, there were a lot, like 8 a night.
Yeah, Patricia gave some incredible testimony of, I think it was her first day out there, and somebody had died, and there was a mother wailing and reporters shouting questions at the mother, and she was trying to figure out what her role was. And that kind of storytelling really puts you in the place and inside her mind. And you were able to get these types of stories, not just from the journalists, but you were also talking to people who are inside of government or running for government. Can you talk about the decision to cast characters of people who are within the Duterte government? I'm thinking of a former national police chief who was running for senator at the time, who one might think you wouldn't have access to him, but then he seemed to give you tons of access and was very open and very surprising in a lot of his comments.
Yeah, because I wanted stand-ins for President Duterte, right? They really channeled the president, because like De La Rosa was actually Duterte's first chief of national police, of the PNP, of the Philippine National Police. He was he was the first implementer of the drug war, and they go back a long way. They go back to when he was mayor of Davao, the southern town in the Philippines, and they sort of came of age together in politics. And when Duterte became president, he took Bato along. That's his name. Bato means actually rock. So he's called Bato. He's just called Bato in the Philippines. So he took General De La Rosa with him, and he became chief of the National Police, and then eventually head of the Bureau of Corrections, which is the head of prisons, and then left that position to run for Senate, and he wins. I'm giving away the end, but he won. So when I approached him, in the beginning, Maria was not the central character. I had wanted a sort of more ensemble cast. I always thought of it as like Robert Altman-esque cast, right? That they are just operating in this world that is Duterte land. And when I approached him, but this isn't my first film about the Philippines or the Philippine experience, he knew my previous work. He also understood that I talked to my audience is beyond just the Philippine audience. That I have a bigger audience than that, because even if I make my films there, I produce it here. He understands the power of narrative, and I was very transparent with everyone. I think that's key. I told him I was covering Maria, I was covering Mocha. He knew everything. I think he appreciated that. I said, this is not a vanity piece. I really want to know what your story is. Tell me what your story is. Tell me, why you believe in the drug war. So to me, it's a real, I want to know. I'm not interested in black and white necessarily. I really want to fill in the in-betweens if there are. I want nuance. Sometimes I get it, sometimes I don't, but that's always my intention. And so with Mocha Uson, who the other character, who's also a Duterte ally, she was singer-dancer who, when President Duterte was running for president, he was just a candidate in 2016. She brought her considerable power, like her 5 million followers on social media, to support Duterte. And for that, he was very grateful. He gave her a job in the administration. She was undersecretary of social media, something in the communications office. She was also interesting. She also understood the power of narrative. She also understood the story. And with her, I really wanted to know why she believed in the president so much. I mean, what was it that made her decide, you're the candidate and I'm going to put my considerable power behind you? And she has her own personal history that you understand. I mean, it's a little misguided, I think, still, but you understand why.
And that comes relatively late in her character development. I think that you see her transformation as a singer to an aspiring politician. You see her out there struggling, not really making it the way that she does. But again, it's through this intimate interview in a car ride that she then starts to talk about her personal history and her father and what made her change. Can you talk a little bit about what that was and what might make somebody support Duterte?
Well, yeah, and it does come late because we wanted to deal with all her public image first, right? Her reputation, and then sort of subvert it toward closer to the end. I think it was the second act. So Mocha's personal history is that her father was a judge who was overseeing a political case. I think it was a mayoral challenge, and her father was assassinated when he was presiding over that case. So it was a political assassination. So when Duterte came on the scene, Duterte really sold law and order. He was the law and order guy. He was going to make things like just, and he connected the drug war to law and order. And that really resonated because she thought, yeah, there are really, like she says, there are thugs posing as politicians out there. And she saw Duterte as changing all that. I mean, which is ironic because, you can say that Duterte might also be a thug. I don't know. But, because he certainly has a language of thuggery. But she believed in him. She believed that, yeah, he's going to, in a way, avenge her father's death. Because they never found out who had actually assassinated her father.
Mm-hmm. I believe we're going to take some questions from the audience soon, but I wanted to ask you another question about the complexities of the Philippine society when these characters that you collected that are neither black nor white and have all these varied histories. Can you talk about when you did screen this film in the Philippines, how you did it and what the reactions were?
So Maria. So on June 15, we knew the first verdict. So Maria has 8 cases, right? June 15, we knew that Maria's first case was going to be decided upon, which was cyber libel. But I felt like no one was paying attention. And at this point, Frontline PBS had already boarded the project. And I said, why don't we make it free for 24 hours in the Philippines just to see, just to bring awareness to the fact that her verdict is going to be handed down Monday. So they agreed. We did it very quickly, and Frontline said, we put it up in Frontline's YouTube channel, and they said, average traffic for something that we advertised way in advance is like between 20 and 30,000. So you'll get less than 20 because we didn't really advertise. I said, that's fine. That's plenty. I just want people to be aware that this verdict is happening, and then we can have a talk back after talking about the case, etc. And they were so good. I mean, we did it in no time. We were up there. We just sent out feelers on social media. Oh my God, Andres, so we were up. It was live on Friday evening, which was Independence Day. It happens. And then we were out Saturday evening, and then we had a live talk back right after. We got 233,000 full views in 24 hours. And it was amazing. I was overwhelmed that weekend because I'm so used to, I'm always making films that decode what's happening in the Philippines for a Western audience. That's always how I see my role, because nothing in the film is like hidden, right? It all happens in front of you. I mean, nothing was covert, right? It all happened in public. So I thought, they know the story. They probably, they'll probably say, oh, yeah, we remember, we know the story. But and maybe I was expecting anger, but more than what I didn't expect was the deep, deep sadness that came through. Because lots of people were messaging me over that weekend, strangers. And the sadness was, I think, what really got me. Because I feel like, and the sentiment was that it took forever to build these democratic institutions, and they took their eyes off the ball. What happened? And of course, compounded by the pandemic and a very strict lockdown. I mean, strict lockdown where they had to stay home or they'll be imprisoned, that's strict. Compounded by that, obviously, but I wasn't ready for the deep sadness that they let things, they took their eyes off the ball.
Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of, I mean, I'm trying to imagine the mood in the Philippines right now. And, the lockdown, as you describe it, was a serious lockdown, not something that we've experienced here. And how has when they see that the film, the people that you're saying that this grieving, is there hope that there's going to change, or are they fighting against a wall that they're powerless against?
I think there will be change if someone can harness that sadness and mixed with anger. Unfortunately, there's no one. Of course, the vice president is part of the opposition. So in the Philippines, you don't vote a ticket in. You can vote the president from one party, and the vice president can come from the opposition party. So the vice president is from the opposition party. So she is the leader of the opposition, but she hasn't really, maybe I shouldn't say, risen to the moment. So there's no one person that really is harnessing that. I think there will be hope. As you know, these things peter out, right? These feelings, these really strong feelings, they peter out. So if there's no one there to harness it at the moment, it's a little difficult. But I think there is growing anger because, of course, the government economy is also tanking. Duterte's response to the COVID is very much like his response to the drug war. It is a police response. It's not a public health response. So he puts everyone in lockdown, but doesn't have a program. He puts a strict lockdown. There's curfew, I think, from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. And if you're caught non-compliant, you can either be put in jail or shot or whatever. It is really a police response. But the lockdown is not helpful if there's no testing, if there's no tracing, if there's no program, right? So it's very, so they're on their 20th, 21st or 22nd week of strict lockdown. I mean, he lifts it a little and then it peaks because there's no program. It's really, but it is maybe his plan, right? No one can go out and protest. It's Duterte's wet dream, this pandemic, actually.
And what's the situation? I mean, Rappler is not the only journalistic organization. What is the situation for all the other journalists in the Philippines? I know that it's not an easy environment to be doing reporting.
No, I mean, Maria, there are many. I mean, Maria is just one story out of the Philippines. The Philippines is one of the most dangerous countries to be a journalist. A lot of people have been, a lot of journalists have been either arrested, killed. So she's not the only story, but I think I wanted to tell her story because she does have a global voice. She does have a global audience. If Duterte can do that to her, can you imagine all the other journalists that are not known, that are, can be gotten rid of in smaller pockets of the country, and you never hear their stories.
So what is the status of Maria's story? What's going on with her now?
So she is, she still has cases. There's one case has been handed out. So she was found guilty of cyber libel, which is basically libel on the internet. Very simply put, she was found guilty and can go to jail for up to 6 years. She's fighting it in the court of, she's out on bail. She's fighting it in the Court of Appeals. And if that doesn't work, it goes up to the Supreme Court. She has 7 more cases. So you can think of her cases as it's in 3 buckets, right? To really simplify it, because they're very complicated legal cases, but really 3 buckets. There's cyber libel, which is libel, really, on the internet. There is tax evasion. And the third is anti-dummy, foreign ownership of Rappler, which was really the very first thing that Duterte accused her of, which is foreign ownership. And therefore, there is a closure order on Rappler that they've been fighting since, I think, 2018 now. They're fighting it. So that's why they're still operating.
So they're actively fighting for their journalistic lives in this sense, in terms of keeping the press going. That's incredible. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your film. You've made this film now, and it's the time of COVID. How are you adjusting to be able to get this out to the world? And what are your hopes for this film?
Andres, it's so, when you start making a film, you never imagine how relevant it is, right? I go after characters and themes, and you go after what moves you. At least me, and then I take on, like, I say a character interesting, but I I seldom think, oh, it will be so relevant next year. You can never guess. But the fact that this film is more and more relevant is sad, actually, right? Because it shouldn't be, but it is more and more so. And so when COVID happened, we premiered at Sundance, and we were, I think, scheduled to be in like 12 festivals in the spring. And then, of course, South by was canceled, and then everything else, domino effect. But we knew that we couldn't sit on this film because of the relevance. So we decided, Frontline PBS deboarded it. They acquired the film out of Sundance, and we decided to go on virtual cinema. Basically, virtual cinema is you have participating theaters across the nation. So example, Film Forum in New York. That's what's coming up. Film Forum in New York. So they sign up, they participate, and you can go on our website and choose a theater that you want to support during COVID. They're mostly art houses, and you buy a ticket from them, and then you see the film at home. That's virtual cinema. We're hoping to still have a brick and mortar screening sometime early next year. As a filmmaker, of course, you miss it. I miss the audience. I miss the actual live screening. So we haven't given up. So maybe next year, who knows? But that's what we're doing right now. We're rolling out that way.
Great. And it looks like we do have a question from the audience. And the question has to do with what influence might the Philippine diaspora have in what is going on in the country now, particularly around these issues?
To change?
Yeah.
The Philippine diaspora, it's pretty split. There are a lot of Duterte supporters, actually, and so it's not a unified voice, which is interesting. I think Duterte was one of the first people who really went after the overseas Filipino workers, what you call OFWs. Mm-hmm. And he sold them law and order. So what happens with overseas Filipino workers? They're teachers and nurses who come to this country or the Middle East, everywhere. Filipino nurses are everywhere. And they start sending money home, right? And investing at home, property and stuff. So here's the president says, I'm going to protect what you already have. You have something to protect. I'm going to protect it because I'm the law and order guy. So he won. I mean, he really won the hearts and minds of overseas Filipino workers. They are for him. So it's not one collective voice against what's going on there. So it's interesting. But we are reaching out to them. What they can do is really just keep the story alive, right? And they also have financial power, right? Mm-hmm. To keep independent media going.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like the diaspora is as diverse as the Philippine people are back home.
Yes.
And for you, who you're part of both worlds, and now that you've put yourself in the middle of this story, because now you premiered with this big film about a controversial character. How is it for you to travel back and forth? And would you be safe going back and even showing this film there in a real way?
I don't know. I haven't tried it. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, I've sort of tried to find out because I do hold a U.S. passport, so they can't really accept me or detain me. All they can do is not let me in the country. They can say, we're not going to let you in, go back to the U.S. But we'll see. It'll be interesting. I haven't tested it yet. It's COVID.
There's so many things going on right now, so many unknowns. I mean, but was that something that you knew you were getting into? I mean, sometimes I think of, a friend of mine who's a doctor and COVID hit, and I asked him if he was worried. He said, "Hey, I signed up for this." And you kind of get the same feeling from Maria. She's walking right into the fire, and she's signing up for this battle. Did you know that you were signing up for this when you started this film?
Not at all, Andrés. I mean, but it was really interesting because at some point we needed to stop, and especially I had local crew. I was more worried about the local crew. We leave, my cinematographers and I leave. they stay. So once, and I have great fixers who really assess the danger and tell me these are the dangers. So for me, it's like assessing the danger and figuring out, am I okay with this, right? I was okay with it because I thought, I would always regret not telling the story. It will haunt me if I didn't tell the story. But I knew those were personal choices. So when we understood what the dangers were, I presented it to the entire crew. I said, especially the local crew, I said, if you decide to walk away, I will never take it against you. I will understand. So please feel free. And not one of them did. Not one of them. They said, this is the right story to tell. We're staying. We're going to tell this story with you, which really, oh my God, it was breathtaking. And so with my DPs, right, it became more and more apparent that if she had to wear a bulletproof vest, did we have to as well? But it's so impossible to work with a bulletproof vest. Believe me, it's not fun. So we decided, we're not. We're just going to. Your tolerance for risk really is different. And my tolerance for risk, who knew, was so high. You just do it.
Yeah, and it really shows in the film that there was so much care given in every part of it, that your crew had to really be invested all the way. And it makes me wonder, are you taking a break now, or what are you thinking about, or where's your filmmaking journey going next?
I'm actually thinking of doing fiction next. I'm not sure yet. Of course, there is a part 2 lurking in this film. A lot of people have asked me about part 2, and I think that's a really interesting idea as well. So it's being discussed, but we don't know. It's COVID. It's so hard. I can't even enter the country because of only, I think, Philippine passport holders can enter the country right now. But as you know, things change so quickly because of COVID. You never know. Next week, it might be different. They might lift that. So, but that's being talked about. But it's nice to, it's a pause, and really nice to figure out how to roll this film out and make the story, keep it up, keep it alive through, especially going toward elections, right? Toward November. I think it's important. So it's also nice to be able to really think about that and plan it in this virtual world, because there are silver linings, it's tough that we don't have a live audience. I miss that. But we are in over 70 theaters across the nation. We opened wide. Usually an independent documentary is a platform release. You go small and then go wider and wider. We opened wide, nationwide, virtual, but it's reaching a lot of people. We've been hearing from a lot of people. So something there, silver linings. You just have to embrace the moment, see how you can make it work for you. This is a hard, hand that we've been dealt. So we do. Hopefully I think we're doing the right thing.
I have another question coming in, and the previous question had come from Dan, but here's another question that has to do with the way that you are filming your characters. You spent a lot of time filming screens. There were different screens. There were cell phone screens. There were television screens. Can you talk about, I assume that was deliberate, and if so, can you talk about the stylistic decision to do that?
Yeah, before I film, because I don't film my own stuff, I have cinematographers, but I film observational a lot. So I think it's really key I have a lot of conversation with my cinematographers before we actually start filming. And when I did some research, I realized that screens were a big thing, especially in the Rappler offices. They had big screens. It's a newsroom. And Mocha dealt with screens. She was always on social media and people with their phones. And a lot of the story happens in social media. So I thought it was really key to have this sort of theme throughout the film. And so I'm just so happy you noticed, because people seldom bring it up, but it was a theme simply because it was, people were on social, Duterte was always being beamed out on these big screens at Rappler and in the rallies. So it was just, to me, a really obvious theme. And, when Maria's talking about her security, ramping up security, it's just luck. We didn't plan that Duterte would come up right beside her at a big screen, and she's talking about ramping up the security because the trolls had attacked. I mean, you can't plan that, right? And those are serendipitous, and when it happens, you're like, oh my God, right? It's really breathtaking when things like that happen.
Yeah, I mean, those aren't accidents. I mean, you make your own luck. You followed where you saw the story was happening. I think one of the things that worked out tremendously narratively was how the election was progressing alongside of her arrests. It felt like two storylines that were coming together at the same time. That maybe that was luck, but that was an amazing driving force of the film. Well, Ramona, I think that unless we have any more questions, I want to, if there's any more folks in the audience, please send in your questions now. We have a few minutes. I do want to thank you, Ramona, and I do have another final question for you, which is, as was mentioned at the beginning of the piece, that this is a cautionary tale, or it can be a cautionary tale. What have you learned from covering this in the Philippines that you think Americans need to know about what's happening in our country right now as we are also ramping up for elections?
That disinformation has happened, right? It's here. It's insidious because you don't even know you're a victim, right? Especially those people, I think, who are very well versed and understand what's going on. They're the ones who least think they're victims, but I think everyone is a victim. So I think just to be cautious. I mean, it's really simple. Don't share everything, right? Don't. And Maria talks about this in the film. Bad news travels faster than good news. It just does, because you tend to share it more. So don't share. I mean, everything. Read it first, because sometimes the headline has nothing to do with the article. When you read it, you're like, oh, wait, that's not what the headline said. So I think you have to be really active consumers of news. You can't just be passive. You really have to think about what you're sharing, what you're reading, and look at the source. If you don't know the source, look it up and do your own research, because it's happening here. It's happened already. And I think one thing this film has really taught me is the fragility of institutions, things that you thought were so strong that could never happen in this country. Oh my God, they're happening. I go between the Philippines and America a lot. And I always knew when I was in the Philippines and when I was in America. It was very clear. But once I was sitting here and watching CNN reporters getting arrested on live television. That was when I knew, oh my goodness, things were becoming closer, right? Things were sort of becoming very similar, which I never thought I'd say.
Yeah, that moment for me as a journalist was definitely one of the markers of the past few months, to see a journalist arrested live on television. We do have one more question from the audience, and this is from Claire, who is asking, what would you say is the most important thing for grassroots Filipino organizations in the US, such as Anak Bayan, Gabriela, Migrante? What's the most important thing for them to know?
For them to know about what's going on in the Philippines?
Yeah.
That it's already, this might be controversial, but Duterte talks about it himself, right? Duterte has bragged that he doesn't even have to declare martial law for it to be martial law. What they need to know is the president does everything through this thin veil of legitimacy, right? That's why they take Maria Ressa to court. That's why the shutting down of ABS-CBN, the biggest network in the country, was done through the non-renewal of the franchise. During the Marcos years, Marcos would just take it and nationalize it, right? But this one is all done through seemingly legitimate means. And that's why when Maria says there is no freedom of the press here, everyone says, what are you talking about? You can say there's no freedom of the press and there are no consequences. But there are, because it's little cuts. That's why it's 1,000 cuts. It's little cuts, right, that can bleed you to death. It's the fear. It's self-censoring. and it's already happening. It's, you know, and COVID makes it even worse. So that they should know. It seems like it's normal from the outside, but inside, I think the walls are closing in.
Right. Well, thank you, Ramona, on that note, for all of your time and your thoughts. It's an incredible film. I encourage everybody to see it. It made me think a lot, and I think there's a lot of lessons in it for all of us. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Kate.
Hey, so I'd just like to thank both Andrés and Ramona for all your work and your speaking about this amazing film. Our audience can see it at BAMPFA.org. We're one of the many outlets that's screening the film, and I watched this film in preparation for the San Francisco International Film Festival, and it was one of the films that we were going to show in our theater. So I've actually been tracking it since then, and you know, trying to find out what was happening with it. And then when Maria got arrested, I was like, oh, what's happening with that film? We need to see it. We need to show it. Our audience needs to see it now. And because it was so powerful, even when I watched it back before the festival, it was so powerful and important and timely. And so I'm very, very grateful for all your work. And I'm glad that we could share it at our theater amongst all the other theaters. And I hope you do very well with it. It's so much about this virtual world that in a way, I think a virtual cinema release makes sense for it. I do really miss being in a live environment, but I think it works on many screens. And if this can get it into, get more people seeing it, I think that it's the right way to go. But I just thank you so much. And thank you so much, Andrés, for all your wonderful questions and leading this conversation.
Oh, thanks, Andrés.
Yeah, no, thank you all.
Yeah. Thank you.